The morning Duke Alaric Ravenscar decided to lie was a morning of thin grey light and thin grey rain. He stood at the window of his study at Ravenscar Hall and looked out at the wet road that led away from his gates. The road was long, and it curved around the low hills of the North Country, and it went on and on until it reached the small village of Marbrook. He had never been to Marbrook. He had never met the family who lived just outside it. He had never seen the young woman whose name had been placed before him 3 weeks ago as a suitable match. But he had made a decision, and once he made a decision he did not turn back from it. He was going to Marbrook. He was going alone, and he was not going as the Duke of Ravenscar. He had been lied to before. That was the plain fact of it. 2 years ago a woman had come to this house with her mother and her aunts, and a wagon full of silk trunks, and she had smiled at him for 4 days, and she had told him she loved the sound of rain on the roof, and she had told him she cared nothing for money, and every word of it had been a small, polished stone dropped into a pond to make the right sound. He had almost married her. He had come within 1 week of the wedding. And then, on a small errand, he had walked into a room and heard her speaking to her sister about the number of gowns she would buy with his purse, and about how she would send his old aunts away, and about how the servants would learn who was mistress soon enough. She had laughed. Her laugh had a sharp edge to it, like the ring of a coin dropped on marble. He had turned and walked out of the room without a sound, and by the next morning he had ended the arrangement, and he had sworn something to himself in the cold grey light of his own study. He had sworn he would never again let a woman perform for him. If he was to marry, he would see the woman first, before she knew who he was. So on the wet morning he put on the coat of a common tradesman. The coat was good wool, but he had rubbed the elbows against a stone wall until they looked worn. He put on boots that had been soaked and dried and soaked and dried again, until the leather had lost its polish. He put on a plain hat with a wide brim. He looked at himself in the long glass in his dressing room, and he saw a man who might be a horse dealer, or a travelling clerk, or a builder of small country bridges. He saw a man that no one would look at twice. That was what he wanted. He took the mail coach as far as the crossroads at Denby, and from Denby he walked. It was 7 miles of muddy road and cold wind, and by the time he came in sight of the village of Marbrook the sun was low and orange behind the trees, and the smoke of the evening fires was rising in thin blue lines from the chimneys of the cottages. He smelled wood smoke and wet grass, and the sharp, sweet smell of a hedge in bloom. He smelled bread from someone's oven. He had not smelled bread from someone's oven in years. In his own house the bread was carried in on silver trays, and by the time it reached him it smelled of nothing at all. He took a room at the small inn on the edge of the village. The innkeeper was a large man with a red face and quick eyes, and he asked no questions when the traveller paid in coin. The room was small and clean, and the bed was hard. There was a jug of water on the washstand, and a candle in a pewter holder, and the sound of a horse stamping in the yard below. Duke Alaric Ravenscar, in his rough coat and worn boots, sat down on the edge of the hard bed, and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in a year. The family he had come to observe lived a mile beyond the village, in a stone house called Renfield. The father was a baronet, honest but poor. The mother had been dead 6 years. There was a young woman of 22 named Miss Petra Halloway, and it was her name that had been placed before him. There were also, he had been told, 2 younger sisters and a small brother of 9 years. He had learned all of this from letters and papers. He had not learned anything of substance. That was what he had come to learn. He rose the next morning early, before the light was strong, and he walked the mile to Renfield. He did not go up the drive. He went instead along the low stone wall that bordered the property, and he came to a place where the wall met a small wood. And there he stopped and looked across the meadow at the house. It was a plain house of pale stone, 3 stories, with ivy on one wall and a slate roof that dipped a little in the middle. There was a kitchen garden to one side and a small orchard behind. There were 3 horses in the paddock. There was smoke from 2 of the chimneys. It was not a rich house. It was a house that had been kept up carefully with little money. He turned back toward the village, and he began to walk the road that led past the school and the church and the small green with the well in the middle. He walked without hurry. He wanted to be seen as a man who belonged there. He nodded to a woman with a basket of eggs. She nodded back. He touched his hat to an old man on a bench. The old man raised a hand. This was, Alaric thought, a village where a stranger could pass without alarm if he did not try too hard. At the top of the green there was a small path that led up to the mountain road. The mountain was called Denby Fell, and the road wound up along its side and crossed over into the next valley. He had heard the innkeeper say that the children of the village school were taken up to a certain flat rock on the mountain path every fine day to have their lessons in the open air. It was thought to be good for them. He walked up the path because the walk suited him, and because he wanted to see the country. He had not gone half a mile when he heard the first sound. It was a low sound at first, a kind of soft rumble that he took at first for far thunder. But there was no cloud in the sky. He stopped on the path and he listened. The sound grew. It was not thunder. It was the sound of stone moving on stone, and it was coming from somewhere above him and to his right. Then he heard the voices of children, and one voice above the others, a woman's voice. Sharp and clear, calling out one word, down then the rumble grew, and the ground itself gave a small shiver under his boots, and he began to run. He came around the bend of the path and he saw it. A great slab of the mountain had come loose. It was not the whole face of the mountain, but it was a wide fall of loose stone and earth. And it had come down across the path, just at the place where the path bent around a shoulder of rock. The dust was still rising from it. The rocks were still settling with small, sharp sounds. And on the near side of the fall, closer to him, there stood a young woman with a torn brown shawl and a smear of dirt across her cheek, and she was shouting one word again and again into the pile of stones. Simon, Simon, Simon. He did not know then that her name was Petra Halloway. He knew only that a rockslide had trapped the children on the mountain path, and that she was already climbing onto the pile before anyone else in the whole valley had even heard the noise. He reached her in 10 long strides. She did not look at him. She was pulling at a stone the size of a small dog, and it would not move. Her hands were bleeding already. Her breath came in short, hard pulls. She was not crying. She was not calling for help. She was digging. "How many?" he said. She did not turn her head. 4. On this side. 2 of them are on the far side, safe. I saw them run. Simon is here. Anna is here. 2 others. Help me or leave. He took hold of the stone with her. Together they rolled it back. Under it was a smaller stone, and under that a hollow, and in the hollow a small hand, fingers curled, dust in the palm. She did not gasp. She said, "Simon, if you can hear me, tap the hand." The fingers moved. She let out one breath, and then she was digging again. "Send someone for men," Alaric said. "I sent the 2 who ran," she said. "They went down for the village. They are fast. We do not wait for them. We dig now." He looked at her once. Her face was thin and grave and streaked with dust, and there was a small cut on her jaw where a flying chip of stone had caught her. Her eyes were the colour of wet slate. She was not beautiful in the way the London drawing rooms understood beautiful. She was something else, something that had no name in a drawing room. He would think of it later as a face made for weather. He put his shoulder against a stone and pushed. It did not move. He set his boots into the loose earth and pushed again. It shifted. She was already at his elbow, pulling smaller stones out from beneath it as it lifted, quick as a mole clearing a burrow. Between the 2 of them they cleared a space large enough for a child's head. Simon's face came into the grey light. He was a small boy of perhaps 9 years, with dark hair and a bloody lip and eyes that were too calm for what had happened to him. "Miss Halloway," the boy said. "I am here," she said. "I am here, Simon. Do not move your legs. Are your legs pinned?" "One is. Can you feel your toes?" "Yes, miss. Good boy. Very good boy. We will get you out. Do not move. Save your breath." She turned to Alaric without pause. "There is a beam. My father keeps beams in the barn at Renfield for the fence. If a man could ride and fetch one, we could lift the top stone off his leg. There is a horse in the meadow just below. Take it. Go." He looked at her for 1/2 of a heartbeat. She was giving orders to a man she had never seen. She had not asked his name. She had not asked whether he was to be trusted with a horse. She had made a judgment about him in the 4 seconds of him arriving, and the judgment was that he would do. He felt something turn over in his chest. "I will go," he said. "Ride hard. Tell my father Petra sent you. He will not ask twice." He half slid, half ran down the slope. The horse in the meadow was a plain brown mare. He caught her by the mane, spoke to her the way he had been taught by his own head groom long ago, and he was on her back and over the stone wall before he had thought about a saddle. He rode her hard across the meadow and up the drive of Renfield and into the yard with a shout that brought a grey-haired man out of the barn at a run. Alaric spoke 5 sentences. The grey-haired man went white, and then he moved. 2 beams were on the cart in under a minute. A second horse was hitched. 2 farm men came from the field with picks. A boy of perhaps 14 came running from the kitchen door with a length of rope and a jug of water. Nobody wasted a word. This was a family that acted as one hand. Alaric led them back up the mountain path. When they came round the bend, he saw that Miss Petra Halloway had, in the time he had been gone, cleared enough stone to get her arm to a second child. This was a girl of perhaps 7. Anna. The girl was crying now, quiet and steady, and Petra was talking to her in a low, even voice about a small grey cat that lived in the Renfield kitchen. She had not stopped talking. She had not stopped digging. Her hands were worse now. Blood was dark on the stones she moved. The men set the beam and levered the top stone. It rose an inch, then 3, then a foot. Simon's leg came free. He made a small sound that was not quite a scream. Petra caught him under the arms and lifted him and passed him back to the boy with the rope, who carried him to the grass at the side of the path and laid him down and covered him with his own coat. Anna came out next. Then a third child, a girl of 8, who had been curled in a hollow between 2 great slabs and who had not been touched by any of the fall, only frightened into stillness. The 4th was harder. She was a small girl of 6, and one of her arms was under a stone that would not lift with 2 men. It took 3. When she came out, she was breathing, but she was not awake. Petra held her against her chest, and she looked up at the grey-haired man, her father, and for the first time her face broke, just for 1/2 a second, and then she gathered it back and she said, "Bring her home. Send for the surgeon." Ride, they rode. She stayed behind on the mountain, because there were the 2 children on the far side of the fall who had run for help and who might have come back and might be lost in the wood. Alaric stayed with her. Neither of them said why he stayed. He simply did. They climbed over the top of the pile carefully, testing each stone. On the far side the path was clear. They walked down it calling the names of the 2 children, and after a 1/4 mile they found them, both boys, sitting on a log by the side of the path, one of them holding the other's ankle, which had been turned in the running. Petra knelt in the leaves and looked at the ankle and told the boy he had been very brave, and that his mother would be proud, and that he was going to have to hop the last part with Alaric's arm around him. Alaric picked the child up instead and carried him. The boy was light and warm and smelled of soap and dust. Alaric had not carried a child in his arms in his adult life. He had not known how it would feel. They came down off the mountain in the last of the daylight. At the foot of the path a small crowd had gathered from the village. Word had spread. 2 women wept when they saw the boys. A man Alaric took to be the schoolmaster shook Petra's hand and could not speak. The grey-haired baronet came out of the crowd and put his arms around his daughter and said only, "Petra." She stood in his arms for a moment and closed her eyes. Then she opened them and said, "The little Ashby girl. Is she awake?" "Yes," said her father. "The surgeon says the arm is broken, but the bone did not come through. She will mend." Petra nodded once. Then, and only then, she began to shake. Her father held her tighter. Nobody in the crowd spoke of it. It was the kind of village where a woman was allowed to shake for 1 minute at the end of a day like that, without any comment being made. Alaric stood a little apart. He had set the boy with the turned ankle down on a bench. He was covered in dust, and his hands were bleeding a little, and he did not know what to do with himself. The baronet looked up, and saw him, and came across. You are the man who rode for the beam. I am. What is your name, sir? He had not expected to be asked so plainly, and so soon, and by such an honest face. For one small moment he almost said his true name, but he had come here for a reason, and the reason was not undone by one afternoon of digging stones, however much it had turned something in his chest. So he said, "My name is Cal Ward. I am a traveller. I was walking up the path when I heard the fall. Mr. Ward, my house is your house tonight. You will come to Renfield. My daughter will not hear of anything else, and neither will I. Sir, I have a room at the inn. You will leave the room at the inn and you will come to Renfield. My cook will feed you. My man will draw you a bath. If we have to tie you to the cart, we will do it. Do not argue with a country baronet on a day like this. We are not in a mood to be argued with." Alaric looked past the baronet to where Petra stood. She was watching him. Her eyes were the colour of wet slate, and they were very steady. She had not thanked him. She was not going to thank him. He understood, somehow, that in her world the thanks was in the invitation. "I will come," he said. He walked down to the inn and paid the innkeeper for the night that was not to be used, and he took up his small bag, and he came back to Renfield in the last blue light of the evening. The house smelled of stew, and of a wood fire, and of clean linen. In the kitchen there was a girl of about 16 who curtsied to him with a wet cloth still in her hand, and a boy of 9 who Alaric now realized was the small brother he had been told about, and who had not been on the mountain, but who had heard the story and was very quiet with the size of it. The younger of the two sisters was upstairs sitting with the little Ashby girl, who had been carried to Renfield because it was the nearest bed. The house was not organized like a house that had guests. It was organized like a house that took people in. Petra came down the stairs in a different gown. Her hair was pulled back with a plain ribbon. Her hands had been washed and wrapped in strips of clean linen. She had not put on any softness. She looked at Alaric across the flagged floor of the hall and she said, "You did well up there, Mr. Ward. So did you, Miss Holloway. I have known those children since they were born. I would have dug with my teeth. It was not remarkable in me. It was remarkable in you. You did not know them." He did not know what to say to that. In the drawing rooms of London, he was praised often, and it always felt like nothing. Here in the flagged hall of a poor stone house, a woman with linen on her hands told him he had done well, and it went into him like a warm drink. "I was glad to be there," he said, which was as close to the truth as he could get without giving himself away. They ate at a plain table in the small dining room. The baronet, Sir Rowland Holloway, was a quiet man with a slow smile and a habit of listening more than he spoke. The two sisters were called Maren and Cecily, one of 19 and one of 15. The small brother was called Thomas. There was no cook grand enough to serve, so the food came in from the kitchen, carried by Maren herself, and it was hot bread and mutton stew, and cheese and apples. And Alaric ate 3 helpings without knowing he had done it. Nobody made a fuss over him. Nobody asked him what business a traveller was in. They spoke of the children on the mountain, and of the surgeon's opinion, and of the state of the road that had let a slide come down where no slide had ever come, and of a neighbour's cow that had calved that morning. They spoke, in short, as a family speaks, and they had drawn him into it as if he had been a cousin in from the next county. He watched Petra across the table. She ate slowly. She spoke rarely. When she spoke, it was to correct something small in the story her sister was telling, or to ask her father a practical question about the fence in the north field. Once she reached across and put her hand on the wrist of her small brother, who had gone very quiet, and she said, "Tom, it is done. They are all safe. You may eat your bread." The boy nodded and ate his bread. She had known, without looking at him, that he had been sitting with a stone in his chest since he had heard the news. She had known it, and she had reached across and lifted the stone off with one sentence. It was that, Alaric thought later, walking in the orchard in the cool of the evening. It was that. Not the digging on the mountain. Anyone in a state of fear could dig. It was the moment at the table when she had reached across to her brother, without ceremony. It was the way she had said ride to her father, with a shaking child in her arms and no waste of breath. It was the way she had said help me, or leave to a stranger she had never seen. This was a person who did not perform. This was a person who acted. He had spent 2 years looking for someone who did not perform, and here she was, wrapping linen on her hands in a house that smelled of wood smoke, giving orders to her own father without knowing that a duke was watching her from the door. The next morning he came down early. He had thought the house would still be asleep. It was not. The kitchen was already warm. Maren was kneading dough. Thomas was carrying wood. The grey-haired baronet was at the table with a cup of something hot, going over a ledger. And Petra was not there. "She has gone up to the Ashby cottage," the baronet said without lifting his eyes from the ledger. "She went at first light to sit with the mother. She will be back at noon. May I be of any use, sir?" The baronet looked up. He looked at Alaric for a long moment, and then he said, "You may. The stone in the west wall is loose. It has been loose for a month. I have not had a man to spare. If you can lift stone, I can find you tools. I can lift stone." He spent the morning at the wall. It was hard work, and it warmed him, and it emptied his mind. He liked it. Thomas came out and sat on the top of the wall and watched him, and after a while began to hand him stones one by one, and Alaric began to talk to the boy the way he had heard Petra talk to Simon in the pile. Not down to him. Across to him. The boy told him about the pony he was learning to ride, and about a book of maps that he had been given at Christmas, and about a bird he had seen last week that he could not name. Alaric named the bird for him. It was a redstart. The boy repeated the name 3 times to fix it in his head. At noon Petra came back along the lane. She was walking slowly, and she looked tired. She stopped at the wall and looked at what Alaric had done, and she said, "That is better work than my father can afford. Are you a mason, Mr. Ward? I have set a stone or 2. Where? Here and there. Wherever I have stopped." She looked at him for a moment. Her eyes were very steady. She did not push. She said, "Come in. My father wants to speak with you about the road." Over the next 4 days he stayed at Renfield. He mended the wall. He rehung a door in the kitchen that had been dragging on the floor. He walked with Sir Rowland to look at the ditch by the north field. He carried the little Ashby girl from the bed in the upper room down to the parlour and back again, twice, so that she could sit in the light of the window and watch the birds. He read to Thomas from the book of maps. He listened. He said very little about himself. And he watched Petra. He watched her manage a house that had no money to be managed. He watched her stand in the kitchen at the end of a long day and count out coins from a small tin box and set them in 3 careful piles, and put 2 back into the box and hand the 3rd to Maren for the market. He watched her write letters to the parents of the children who had been on the mountain, 1 letter each, in her own hand, sitting at a small desk in the parlour by candlelight, her linen bandages still on her palms, so that the pen was hard to hold. He watched her go without butter at breakfast, so that Thomas could have more. He watched her one evening in the kitchen when she did not know he was there. He had come in through the back door quietly because his boots were muddy, and he did not want to track. She was at the fire, and she had her hands cupped around a mug of tea, and she was standing very still, and she was looking at nothing at all. Just standing. Just breathing. Just resting for 1 minute in the whole day. He stopped in the doorway, and he watched her, and he understood something. This woman worked from before light to after dark, and she carried her father's house and her father's pride on her thin shoulders, and she did not sit down until everyone else had sat down first, and this 1 small minute at the fire with her hands around a mug was her whole day of rest. He backed out of the doorway before she could see him. He would not take that minute from her. He also watched in that same house, on the 3rd day, something that he had not come to see. A man came up the drive on a fine bay horse. He was well dressed in a green coat and a good hat, and he had the smooth face of a man who had never lifted a stone in his life. His name was Mr. Percival Ansdell. He was, Alaric gathered from the way Maren whispered it to Cecily in the hall. A cousin of a cousin, and he had been at Renfield twice before in the last 6 months, and each time he had spoken of Petra in a way that made Maren narrow her eyes. Mr. Ansdell came into the parlour and bowed over Petra's hand, and did not seem to notice the linen on it. He sat and drank tea and spoke of a party in the county town, and of a horse he had bought, and of a new curricle he was thinking of buying, and of the price of wheat, which he did not really know but which he thought he ought to speak of. He looked around the parlour with a small, careful look, and Alaric, sitting quietly in the corner with the book of maps on his knee, saw the look. Mr. Ansdell was pricing the room. He was pricing the chairs, and the small silver bowl on the side table, and the modest paintings, and the worn carpet. He was making a calculation. And then Mr. Ansdell said, in a voice that was meant to be light, "My dear Miss Halloway, I have heard from the whole village of your heroics on the mountain. It is a fine story. You must let me carry you off to the Fenmore ball next month, and you shall tell the story again, and I will stand beside you, and we shall be quite the pair. You must not hide your light any longer under this bushel of a house." Petra did not smile. She said, "The house is not a bushel, Mr. Ansdell. It is my father's house, and it is mine." Of course. But you know what I mean." "I do know what you mean. I do not agree with what you mean." The room was quiet for a moment. Mr. Ansdell laughed lightly, to cover it, and moved on to another subject. But Alaric, watching from his corner, saw the small stiffening at the corner of Mr. Ansdell's mouth. It was the look of a man who had been told no, and who was not used to it, and who would not forget. That night, after Mr. Ansdell had gone, Alaric walked in the orchard again. He had made his decision. He had come to Renfield to see the truth of a woman. He had seen it. He had seen it in every hour of every day since he had arrived. He was going to end the deception. He would tell her at breakfast. He would tell her father first, out of respect, and then he would tell her. He did not sleep well. When morning came, he dressed carefully in the same rough coat, because he had no other, and he came down to the kitchen with his heart beating faster than he liked. Sir Rowland was at the table. Alaric asked to speak with him privately. They went into the small study at the back of the house, a room that smelled of leather and old paper and pipe smoke. Alaric did not sit. He said, "Sir Rowland, I have not told you the truth about myself." The baronet set down his cup. He looked up. He was not surprised. That was the first thing Alaric noticed. He was not surprised. "Go on," said Sir Rowland. "My name is not Cal Ward. My name is Alaric Ravenscar. I am the Duke of Ravenscar. 3 weeks ago a letter was sent to me from a cousin of yours in London, suggesting a match between myself and your eldest daughter. I did not answer the letter. Instead, I came here to see for myself what kind of woman she was. I have been deceived once before by a woman who performed well in a drawing room, and I swore to myself I would not marry a performance. I came in this coat so that I could see the truth. I have seen it. Miss Halloway is not a performance. I would like your permission to tell her who I am, and I would like your permission to court her honestly." Sir Rowland was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You saved my daughter a great deal of trouble on that mountain, your grace, and you have set a stone wall for me and rehung my kitchen door, and read to my son about redstarts. I will not pretend I am pleased about the coat, but I will say that if you had come to my door in a duke's carriage with 4 horses and a footman, I would not have learned what I have learnt about you in 4 days. So I will say this. Speak to her. But you speak to her plainly, and you do not use the word duke as a hammer. My daughter has a temper that comes on slow, but that lasts. Do not underestimate it. I will not. Sir, go then." She was in the parlour with the little Ashby girl on her lap. The child was better, and could sit up and was watching a bird outside the window. Petra was combing the child's hair with slow, careful strokes. She looked up when he came in. Something in his face must have told her, because her hand stopped in the middle of a stroke. "Miss Halloway, may I speak with you a moment?" Alone, she looked at him for one long breath. Then she said, "Maren." Her sister came in from the next room. "Take the little one to the kitchen. She may have a piece of bread with honey." When the door closed behind them, Petra set her hands in her lap. She sat very straight. She said, "Say it, Mr. Ward. My name is not Ward. My name is Alaric Ravenscar. I am the Duke of Ravenscar. I came to Renfield 3 days before the Rockslide. I came in this coat. I came under a false name. I came to see what kind of woman you were, Because a match had been proposed between us and I did not trust proposals anymore. I did not know there would be a rockslide. I did not know I would end up on your mountain with my hands in the stones. But that is the truth of why I came. I am telling you now, because I cannot go on lying to a woman I have decided to court honestly. I am asking your leave to court you. I have your father's leave. I would like yours. She did not move. She did not blink. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. For a moment he thought she was going to say nothing at all, that she was simply going to sit in silence until he left. And he thought that would be worse than any words she could say. And then she spoke. You slept in my father's house. You ate my father's bread. You let my brother, who is 9 years old and who trusts every man who is kind to him, tell you the name of his pony. You sat in the corner of the parlor while Mr. Ansdell tried to buy me with a coach ride. You let all of that happen with a false name in your mouth. Yes, I was told you had been lied to. I understand that a man can be scarred by a lie. I do not have room in my chest to feel sorry for it, but I understand it. What I do not understand, and what I will not understand, is that you tested us. My father, my sisters, my brother, me. You tested a family that took you in. You tested us as though we were animals in a pen at a fair. And we passed, and now you come and tell me I have won you. Is that what you are telling me? He felt the words land. He did not defend himself. Yes, that is what I did. I am ashamed of it. I am not sorry I came. I am ashamed of the coat. You should be. I am. She stood up. She walked to the window. She looked out at the bird the child had been watching. She stood there for a long time. He did not speak. The kitchen door on the far side of the house opened and closed. The clock in the hall struck the half-hour. A sheep called somewhere out in the meadow. At last she said, without turning, you will stay at Renfield today because it would be a rudeness to my father to send you away in the middle of a morning. You will leave tomorrow. You will not court me. You will not write to me. You will not send me flowers or letters or gifts. If in 6 months I have decided that I can speak to you again, I will send you a letter. If I do not send you a letter, you will understand what that means. Do you understand what I am telling you? I do. Then go. Sit with Thomas. He is fond of you. Do not spoil the last of his fondness by looking as though you have been struck. He went. He sat with Thomas in the orchard, and he heard the boy talk about the Red Start, and he answered as well as he could. Thomas noticed nothing. That night at supper Sir Rowland spoke quietly to Petra at one end of the table, and Petra answered quietly back, and no one else was told. In the morning Alaric packed his small bag. Sir Rowland shook his hand at the gate. Merrin curtsied. Thomas hugged him around the waist, and Alaric put his hand for one moment on the boy's dark hair, and did not trust himself to speak. Petra was not at the gate. He had not expected her to be. He walked back to the crossroads at Denby. He took the mail coach. He rode home. And at home he did the one thing she had asked him to do. He did not write. He did not send. He did not court. He waited. The weeks became a month. The month became 2. He did not go to London for the season. He stayed at Ravenscar Hall, and he set his own affairs in order. He rode his own fields. He met with his own tenants for the first time in years, in their own kitchens, sitting on wooden chairs, drinking their own tea. He listened. He mended 2 things on the estate that had been broken for a long time, and that his steward had not thought worth mentioning. He did not speak of Petra Holloway to any person. But once, in the 6th week, he heard from a small side note in a letter from his London solicitor that a Miss Percival Ansdell of the North Country had been making inquiries about the settlement upon Miss Petra Holloway of Renfield, and had been suggesting to persons in the county town that she was a woman of loose tongue and worse judgment who had lately been seen in the company of a strange man in the mountains without a chaperone. Alaric read the note twice. He set it down. He did not throw it into the fire, though his hand wanted to. Instead, he called for a pen and paper, and he wrote 3 letters. One went to his solicitor. One went to a man in the county town who owed him a favour. And one went, quietly, to the widow Ashby, whose child had been dug out of the mountain, and it contained a bank draft in a sum that would keep the widow and her child for 5 years, and a single line asking that the source of the draft be kept private. He did not sign the line with his title. He signed it only "A Friend of the Mountain." He sealed the letter and sent it off, and he thought no more about it. He did not tell his solicitor about it. He did not tell his steward. He did it because a small girl of 6 had been under a stone, and he had helped to lift the stone off her. And it seemed to him, in a way he did not fully understand, that some things simply needed to be done and never spoken of. The other 2 letters did their work quietly. Within a fortnight, Mr. Percival Ansdell found the small loans on which he had been living called in from 3 directions at once, and the character he had been building for himself in the county town was, without any fuss and without any name attached, corrected in the ears of the people who mattered. He was not ruined. He was simply, quietly, made unimportant. Alaric never mentioned it to anyone. He did not mention it in his own head, most days. It was a stone he had lifted. That was all. At the end of the 6th month, on a grey morning that was not so different from the grey morning on which he had first put on the rough coat, a letter came for him at Ravenscar Hall. It was in an unfamiliar hand. It was thin. He took it into his study and shut the door. He did not open it at once. He set it on the desk and looked at it. He walked to the window and looked out at the wet road that led to Marbrook. Then he came back and opened it. It was short. "Your Grace, the little Ashby girl, walked across the parlour unaided last week. Her mother has taken a cottage at the edge of the village that she could not have afforded on her own. She does not know from whom the help came. I do. It was not difficult to find out. I have not told her. I have thought about you often in these 6 months. I did not want to. I did it anyway. If you would like to come to Renfield again, you may. Come as yourself this time. Come in whatever coat you like. But come as yourself. Petra Halloway." He read it twice, then a 3rd time. Then he stood at the window for a long minute, and he felt, for the first time in 2 years, something in his chest go still. He did not send an answer. He rode. He came to Marbrook in the late afternoon of the 2nd day. He came in a plain coat, because he had learned something about coats, but it was his own plain coat, of good cloth, unrubbed at the elbows. He came on his own horse, a tall grey, because it was faster than the mail. He came alone, because that too was a thing he had learned. He rode up the drive of Renfield in the low orange sun, and he saw the smoke rising from the 2 chimneys, and he smelled the wood smoke and the wet grass and the bread from someone's oven, and it undid him a little. She was in the orchard. She had a basket over her arm. She was gathering the last of the apples. She looked up when she heard the hoofs, and she stood very still. She did not put down the basket. She did not run to him. She simply stood in the grass under the apple tree with the low sun on her hair, and she watched him ride up. He dismounted at the gate. He walked into the orchard. He stopped 3 paces from her. "You came," she said. "You wrote." "I did. It cost me something." "I know. Do you? I have been counting the days. It cost you 6 months. It cost me the same." She looked at him. Her eyes were the colour of wet slate, and they were very steady. There was no linen on her hands now. The cuts had healed to thin white lines across her palms. He wanted very much to take one of her hands in his own, and he did not. He had learned that too. "Tell me one thing," she said. "That first day, when you came around the bend and saw the fall, when you did not know me, when I was only a woman in a torn shawl shouting at a pile of stones, what made you stay?" He thought about it. He had thought about it many times. "You said, 'Help me or leave.' You did not say, 'Please.' You did not look at me to see whether I was a gentleman. You gave an order to a stranger because there was a child under the stone, and you had no time for anything else. I have lived my whole life among people who look first to see who I am before they decide what to say to me. You did not look. That was the moment. Before I knew your name. Before I knew you were the woman in the letter. Before I knew anything. That was the moment." She was quiet. Then she said, "That is a better answer than I expected. I have had time to think of it. You have. And you did not write. You told me not to. You obeyed me. I did. And the widow Ashby. He looked down at the grass. Someone told you. You are not the only person in the county who can find out a thing quietly. I asked the vicar. He asked the bank. The bank does not tell easily, but it tells eventually. You should have signed the letter with a false name. You did, in a way. But there was only one friend of the mountain who was not from the mountain. I did not want you to know. I know you did not. That is why I know. She set the basket down in the grass. She took one step toward him. Only one. She stopped. I am not going to fall into your arms in an orchard, Your Grace. I am not that kind of woman. I told you 6 months ago you would not court me. I did not say you would not know me. I am saying now that you may know me. Slowly, as yourself, in your own coat, with your own name, in my father's house where my brother is fond of you and my sisters watch you carefully. If in a year we still know each other, we shall see what there is to see. I will not promise more than that. I do not ask for more than that. Good, she did not step closer. He did not step closer. The low sun came through the branches of the apple tree and lay on the grass between them in long gold bars, and a small wind moved the last leaves, and somewhere in the meadow a sheep called, and in the kitchen at the far end of the orchard a door opened, and a boy's voice called out one word. Petra. She turned her head toward the voice. When she turned back, her face had softened by 1/4 of an inch. He saw it because he had been watching for it for 6 months. Come in, she said. Thomas will want to show you the redstart. He has seen it 3 times since you left. He has been keeping a list. She picked up the basket. She walked toward the house. He fell in beside her, not touching her, matching her step. At the kitchen door she paused. She did not look at him. She looked at the wood of the door frame where he had rehung the door 6 months before. The door did not drag on the floor anymore. She put her hand for one moment against the frame. Flat, quiet, the way a person touches something that has been mended and has stayed mended. Then she opened the door and went in, and he followed her, and the smell of bread and wood smoke and clean linen came out to meet him like the arms of a house that had decided, at last, to let him stay. And in the warm light of that plain stone kitchen, with a boy running to the door, and a baronet rising from a table, and a girl with linen, no longer on her hands, standing quietly beside him. Alaric Ravenscar understood that some houses are earned 1 stone at a time, and that the woman who had dug children out of a mountain would, in her own time and in her own way, dig him out of himself as well.